Some moments are silent explosions. They don't make a sound, but they shatter your entire world in an instant. For 24-year-old Ilara Vance, that moment came on a Tuesday evening, under the soft, gilded light of the city's most exclusive restaurant. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was just a ghost in a black apron, refilling water glasses and clearing away the remnants of $1,000 meals. But then she saw it, a flash of fire and silver on the hand of a woman draped in diamonds. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a memory, a promise, a ghost of her mother's touch. And without thinking, with her heart hammering against her ribs, she broke every rule she was meant to follow. Her trembling hand extended, her finger pointing at the ring, and 3 words escaped her lips that would ignite a firestorm, unearthing a secret that a billionaire would pay anything to keep buried. The air in Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. For Ilara Vance, it was the smell of survival. Every perfectly polished wine glass, every meticulously folded napkin, was a step closer to affording the next round of medication for her younger sister, Lily. Lily, with her bright eyes and brittle bones, was the sun Ilara's world orbited around, and Aurelia was the unforgiving galaxy she had to navigate to keep that sun from fading. Her shoes, sensible black flats from a discount store, were a stark contrast to the Louboutins and Jimmy Choos that glided across the marble floor. She was adept at being invisible, a silent phantom moving between tables of hedge fund managers and aging socialites. Her mantra was simple: keep your head down, your smile pleasant, and your opinions non-existent. Tonight, however, was different. Table 7, the most coveted booth with a panoramic view of the glittering city skyline, was occupied by Julian Thorne. Even someone like Ilara, who lived in a world of overdue bills and instant noodles, knew that name. Thorne was a titan of the tech industry, a self-made billionaire whose face was plastered on the covers of Forbes and Wired. He was younger than the legends of old money, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to analyze everything, and a jawline that could have been carved from granite. He was not alone. Across from him sat Isabella Sterling, a woman who looked as though she were sculpted from champagne and condescension. Her dress was a sliver of crimson silk, and diamonds dripped from her ears and neck. They were the perfect power couple, a portrait of success Ilara could only dream of. Her job was to refill their water, to offer them bread, to be a functional piece of the background scenery. She approached the table with the practiced ease of a seasoned waitress. "More water, sir." "Ma'am?" she asked, her voice a soft, polite murmur. Julian Thorne barely looked up from his phone, giving a curt, dismissive nod. But Isabella Sterling extended her glass, her fingers wrapped delicately around the stem. And that's when Ilara saw it. Time stopped. The clatter of the kitchen, the murmur of conversations, the soft jazz playing over the speakers, it all faded into a deafening silence. On Isabella's left ring finger, nestled amongst a collection of other expensive bands, was a ring that had no place in this world of cold, hard wealth. It was not a diamond. It was a fire opal, an orb of captured sunset, swirling with hues of orange, red, and electric green. The stone was held in a delicate, handcrafted setting of woven silver, intricately shaped to look like the cascading leaves of a weeping willow. It was unique, artisanal, and deeply personal. It was her mother's ring. The breath caught in Ilara's throat. 1,000 memories assaulted her at once. Her mother, Lena, sitting by the window, the afternoon light catching the fire in the opal as she sketched in her notepad. Lena, her hands smelling of turpentine and love, holding Ilara's small face and saying, "This ring, my love, is a promise. It means that even in sadness, Like a weeping willow, there is beauty and strength. The memory of her mother's last days, her hand frail and cold, the ring still glowing with life, and the final, soul-crushing memory, standing in a dimly lit, dusty pawn shop, the gruff owner counting out a few $100 bills. Not enough. Never enough. As she slid the ring, her last piece of her mother, under the glass. It was the money that had paid for one more month of Lily's experimental treatment, a sacrifice she had replayed in her nightmares ever since. Her training, her mantra, her desperate need for this job, it all evaporated. There was only the ring, a beacon of her past shining on the hand of a stranger. Isabella noticed her staring, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowed in annoyance. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice sharp and cold. Ilara's own hand, the one holding the heavy water pitcher, began to tremble. Water sloshed precariously close to the rim. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. All she could do was lower the pitcher to her service tray, her movements robotic, and raise her other hand. Her finger, raw and red from cleaning chemicals, pointed directly at the opal. Julian Thorne finally looked up from his phone, his gaze sharp and impatient. "What is it?" Ilara's eyes were locked on Isabella, but her words were a choked whisper, meant for the universe, for her mother, for anyone who would listen. "That ring," she said, her voice cracking with an emotion she couldn't contain. Where did you get that ring?" Isabella scoffed, pulling her hand back as if Ilara had tried to touch her. "I beg your pardon? That's hardly any of your business." But Ilara couldn't stop. The dam of her composure had broken. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the glittering restaurant into a kaleidoscope of cruel, indifferent lights. "That was my mother's," she said, the words tumbling out, raw and accusatory. "That was my mother's ring." The silence that followed was no longer in her head. It was real. The nearby tables quieted, the staff froze, and Julian Thorne's face, which had been a mask of bored indifference, transformed into something else entirely. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with a sudden, shocking intensity. He wasn't looking at Isabella. He was looking at Ilara, and in his stunned silence, the entire room held its breath, waiting for the explosion. For a long moment, nobody moved. The scene was a frozen tableau. The scornful fiancé, the stunned billionaire, and the trembling waitress whose world had just tilted on its axis. It was Isabella who broke the spell, her laughter sharp and brittle, like breaking glass. "Your mother's. Darling, you must be mistaken," she said, her voice dripping with venomous pity. "My fiancé is a billionaire, not a grave robber. This is a vintage piece from a reputable dealer in Geneva. I highly doubt your mother shopped in a place like that." The insult was designed to put Ilara back in her place, to remind her of the vast, unbridgeable chasm between their worlds. And it worked. The heat of shame flushed Ilara's cheeks. She was just a waitress making a scene. What was she thinking? I'm sorry," she stammered, taking a step back. "I shouldn't have. No, you certainly shouldn't have," a stern voice cut in. It was Monsieur Dubois, the restaurant's manager, a man whose spine seemed to be permanently starched. He had materialized at the table with the silent speed of a predator. "Miss Vance, you are creating a disturbance. Apologize to Mr. Thorne and Miss Sterling immediately, and then report to my office." But Julian Thorne held up a hand, a gesture that silenced both Dubois and Isabella instantly. His eyes, a startlingly clear shade of grey, were still fixed on Ilara. The initial shock on his face had been replaced by a deep, unsettling curiosity. It was the look of a man presented with an impossible puzzle. "Wait," he said, his voice calm but resonant with authority. "Let her speak." Isabella gaped at him. "Julian, don't be ridiculous. She's clearly delusional. She probably saw something shiny and concocted some sob story to try and get money out of you." "Let her speak," he repeated, his gaze never leaving Ilara's face. He gestured to the empty chair beside him, an invitation so shocking that Monsieur Dubois audibly gasped. Ilara shook her head, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "No, I can't. I'm sorry. Please just forget I said anything." She turned to flee, to run back to the anonymity of the kitchen, but Julian's voice stopped her again. "The ring," he said, his tone measured and precise. "Describe it, without looking at it." Ilara froze. She squeezed her eyes shut, and the image was there, seared into her memory. "It's a fire opal," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not perfectly round. There's a small, darker inclusion near the top, like a tiny fleck of ash. The setting is sterling silver, not platinum. It's designed to look like weeping willow leaves, and one of the leaves on the underside has a tiny, almost invisible inscription." Julian leaned forward, his elbows on the table. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. "What does it say?" "Amor Manet," Ilara whispered, the Latin words feeling like a prayer on her tongue. "Love remains." It was what her father had inscribed for her mother. A muscle twitched in Julian's jaw. He turned to a stunned Isabella. "Let me see the ring." "What? Julian, this is absurd," she protested. "Isabella, the ring. Now." His voice was quiet, but it held a steel edge that allowed no argument. Reluctantly, with a look of pure fury directed at Ilara, Isabella twisted the ring off her finger and slapped it onto the white tablecloth. Julian picked it up, holding it under the soft candlelight. Using his phone's flashlight for a better look, he examined the underside. The entire restaurant seemed to lean in, a silent, captive audience. After a moment, he placed the ring back on the table and looked at Ilara. His expression was grim. He had seen the inscription. "This is outrageous," Isabella hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "Are you actually taking the word of a common waitress over mine? I told you where I bought it." "And we will verify that," Julian said smoothly, though his eyes told a different story. He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the table. He pulled out a sleek, black wallet and extracted several $100 bills, dropping them on the table. More than enough to cover the untouched meal. He then turned to Monsieur Dubois. "I trust you will handle this situation with discretion. This young woman is not to be terminated. In fact, I'd like her contact information. My personal assistant will be in touch." Dubois, pale and sweating, could only nod mutely. The power dynamic in the room had shifted entirely. Julian Thorne was no longer a customer. He was a force of nature, and no one dared to question him. Julian's gaze fell one last time on Ilara. It was a look of profound confusion, of a man whose carefully ordered world had just been thrown into chaos. "We're not finished here," he said, his words a promise and a threat. He then turned and strode out of the restaurant without another word to Isabella. Left alone at the center of the storm, Isabella Sterling snatched the ring from the table, her face a mask of cold fury. She shot Ilara a look that could curdle milk before gathering her purse and storming out after him. Ilara stood there, trembling, as the restaurant slowly came back to life around her, the whispers now buzzing with her name. She had pointed a finger at a ring, and, in doing so, had poked a hole in the fabric of a billionaire's life. She hadn't been fired, but she felt a terrifying certainty that her life, in all its quiet desperation, had just become irrevocably and dangerously complicated. She had won a small battle, but she had a sinking feeling she was about to face a war. The following 24 hours were a blur of anxious silence. Monsieur Dubois had, as instructed, not fired her. Instead, he'd sent her home with pay, his expression a mixture of terror and awe. "Mr. Thorne's office will call," he'd said, as if speaking of a royal decree. Elara spent the night on the lumpy couch in her tiny apartment, watching Lily sleep. The rhythmic puff of the nebulizer was the only sound in the room. Looking at her sister's fragile form, a wave of guilt washed over her. What had she done? She had risked her job, their only source of income, for a ghost, for a memory. The ring was gone, pawned out of love and necessity. Getting it back had always been a hopeless dream, so why had she ignited this fire? Her phone rang at precisely 9 a.m. the next morning. The caller ID was a blocked number. "Is this Elara Vance?" The voice on the other end was female, professional, and devoid of warmth. "Yes, this is she. This is Catherine Bishop, executive assistant to Mr. Julian Thorne. Mr. Thorne requests your presence at his office at 11 o'clock this morning. A car will be waiting for you downstairs in 15 minutes. It wasn't a question or an invitation. It was a summons. The car that arrived was a sleek, black sedan with tinted windows, the kind Elara had only ever seen in movies. The ride downtown was silent and surreal, taking her to the heart of the financial district, a forest of glass and steel. Thorne Industries occupied the top 10 floors of the tallest skyscraper, a testament to the man's dominance. Catherine Bishop, a woman who matched her voice, impeccably dressed and radiating an aura of intimidating efficiency, met her in the lobby. She led Elara through a maze of minimalist, white-walled offices where people spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Finally, they arrived at a set of large oak doors. "Mr. Thorne will see you now," Catherine said, opening one of the doors and gesturing for Elara to enter. Julian Thorne's office was less an office and more a kingdom. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a godlike view of the city below. The furniture was sparse but expensive, the art on the walls abstract and undoubtedly worth more than Elara would make in a lifetime. Julian was standing by the window, his back to her. He was dressed not in a suit, but in a simple grey t-shirt and dark jeans, which somehow made him seem even more imposing. "Miss Vance," he said, turning around. His face was tired, his eyes shadowed, as if he hadn't slept. The cool, detached billionaire from the restaurant was gone. In his place was a man who looked troubled. "Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice small in the vast space. He gestured to a leather armchair opposite his massive desk. "Please sit." She sat on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. On the desk between them, resting on a small velvet cloth, was the ring. The fire opal seemed to glow with a life of its own, a warm, vibrant heart in the cold, sterile room. "I owe you an apology," Julian began, taking his seat. My former fiancé's behavior was inexcusable." Elara's eyes widened. "Former?" A humorless smile touched his lips. "Our relationship had been a business arrangement for some time. Last night merely illuminated its lack of authenticity. It seems Miss Sterling is more interested in acquiring assets than in telling the truth." He leaned forward, his grey eyes intense. "I spent most of the night trying to get a straight answer from her. Her final story is that she purchased the ring 2 weeks ago from a small, high-end antique and jewelry dealer downtown, a place called Curios and Knots. She claims it was an impulse buy." Elara's heart sank. A legitimate purchase. That meant her claim was just a story, a coincidence. She had no proof, no pawn ticket from that day 5 years ago. It was lost in one of 3 apartment moves. It was her word against a receipt. "I see," she said quietly, her hopes shriveling. "Then I suppose I made a mistake. I'm so sorry for the trouble I've caused." "A mistake?" Julian countered, his gaze unwavering. "You described a hidden inscription you couldn't possibly have seen." "Amour Manet, that's not a mistake, Miss Vance. That's a fact. The question is, how did you know?" This was it. The moment to tell the truth, no matter how unbelievable it sounded. "It was my mother's," she repeated, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "My father gave it to her on their 10th anniversary. He was a musician, not a wealthy man, but he had it commissioned for her from an artist in Santa Fe. My mother, her name was Lena. She was a painter. She loved that ring more than anything. She passed away 7 years ago from cancer." She took a shaky breath, the memory still raw. 2 years later, my younger sister, Lily, got sick. Very sick. The treatments were astronomical. I was working 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough. I sold everything we had of value. The last thing to go was the ring. I pawned it at a little shop on the west side called Silas Fine Pawn. It broke my heart, but it kept Lily alive. I always dreamed that one day I'd be able to buy it back. She finally looked up, meeting his gaze, her eyes shining with unshed tears. When I saw it on her finger, I wasn't thinking. I was just seeing a piece of my mother, a piece of my own soul. Julian listened to her entire story without interruption, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched on, thick with tension. He picked up the ring, turning it over and over in his fingers. "A pawn shop," he mused, more to himself than to her. "It's a long way from Silas Fine Pawn to a boutique in the Diamond District." He looked up, his decision made. "I employ a man named Marcus Vance. No relation, just a coincidence. He's a private investigator, the best in the business. He specializes in tracing provenance, be it for art or, in this case, jewelry. I am going to have him trace the history of this ring." Elara was stunned. You believe me?" "I believe," Julian said carefully, "that you believe what you are saying. I believe you knew about the inscription. I don't deal in belief, Miss Vance. I deal in data. Your story is a data point. Isabella's is another. The ring is the variable. Marcus will find the truth." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I've arranged for you to be on paid leave from the restaurant until this is settled. My assistant will take your details and information about your sister's medical needs. We will ensure she has the best care while we sort this out." Elara was speechless. This was beyond anything she could have imagined. It was an act of kindness. Or was it just a billionaire's way of controlling a problem? "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "Why are you doing all this?" Julian walked back to the window, staring down at the city below. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, like a man trapped in his own gilded cage. "Because," he said, his voice low and laced with a weariness she couldn't comprehend, "my entire life has been built on uncovering the truth, on finding the single, elegant line of code beneath the chaos. And for reasons I don't yet understand, this ring feels like the most important line of code I've ever encountered. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a call to make." Marcus Vance was a man who moved through the world's shadows. He was a former intelligence officer who now lent his considerable and discreet talents to Julian Thorne. When Julian called, it was never about something simple. His latest task traced the journey of a single fire opal ring. His first stop was not the pawn shop, but the upscale dealer, Curios and Knots. The owner, a foppish man named Alistair Finch, remembered Isabella Sterling well. He also, with some persuasion from Marcus's unblinking stare, remembered the ring. "Ah, the willow opal," Alistair trilled, producing a file. "A magnificent, sentimental piece. We acquired it at a state auction, part of an estate sale for a recently deceased socialite, a Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, a notorious collector of eclectic items." The thread was beginning to form. Marcus dug into Eleanor Blackwood. She was old money, reclusive, and had passed away 3 months prior. Her collection was a hodgepodge of valuable art and what her children deemed expensive junk. Marcus got a copy of the auction manifest. Listed between a Ming Dynasty vase and a set of silver cutlery was Lot 34B, silver and opal ring, artisanal, origin unknown. Next stop, Eleanor Blackwood's law firm to inquire about her acquisition records. The lawyers were tight-lipped until Marcus mentioned he was working on behalf of Julian Thorne. Doors opened. He discovered that Mrs. Blackwood had purchased the ring 2 years ago from a mid-level jewelry wholesaler known for acquiring unique pieces from smaller sellers. This was the crucial link. Marcus tracked down the wholesaler, a man who operated out of a cramped office in the jewelry district. After reviewing 2 years of transaction logs, he found it. The ring had been purchased in a bulk lot from a pawn shop on the west side. The name on the acquisition form made the hairs on Marcus's arms stand up. Silas Fine Pawn. The thread had connected. Ilara's story was holding up, link by painful link. Marcus drove to the west side, a world away from the gleaming towers of Thorne Industries. Silas Fine Pawn was exactly as Ilara had described it, a dusty, dimly lit place that smelled of old paper and lost dreams. Behind the counter was a burly, balding man with weary eyes. Silas. "I'm here about a ring," Marcus said, placing a high-resolution photo on the counter. Silas peered at it through his glasses. He grunted. "Yeah, I remember this one. Fire opal. Pretty thing. Sold it years ago." "Do you remember who you bought it from?" Marcus asked. Silas leaned back, scratching his beard. "Son, I see 100 sad stories a week. Faces blur. But this one I remember. A kid. Young girl, maybe 19, crying her eyes out. Said it was her mum's. Needed money for her sister's medicine." He shook his head. "Hated taking it. It was worth more than I could give her, you know, artistically. But the market for opals ain't what it used to be. I gave her what I could." He sighed, a deep, heavy sound. "She said she'd be back for it. They all say that. She never came. About a year later, I sold it. Had to. This is a business, not a museum." Marcus felt a pang of something akin to sympathy. He was a man who dealt in facts, but he couldn't ignore the human cost of this story. "Do you have the original pawn ticket, or a record of the sale?" Silas grunted again and disappeared into a back room filled with dusty file cabinets. After 10 minutes of clattering and cursing, he emerged with a yellowed, carbon copy slip. The date was stamped 5 years ago. The name, written in neat, cursive script, was Ilara Vance. The item description was unmistakable. 1 silver ring were fire opal, willow leaf design, small inscription. It was the proof, the absolute, undeniable truth. Meanwhile, Ilara's life had been turned upside down. True to his word, Julian had taken care of everything. Lily had been moved to a private suite at the city's top pediatric hospital, where a team of specialists were reviewing her case. A financial advisor from Thorne Industries had contacted Ilara to set up a trust to cover all of Lily's current and future medical expenses, explaining it was a standard non-disclosure advance pending the resolution of her claim. It was overwhelming. Elara sat by Lily's bedside in the sterile, quiet room, watching her sister sleep peacefully for the first time in years, unburdened by the hum of old, faulty equipment. This was the result of a billionaire's curiosity. It was a miracle born from a nightmare. Yet she felt a profound unease. She hadn't asked for charity. She had asked for a piece of her mother. Julian Thorne was solving her problems with money, but the one thing she truly wanted, the ring, still felt impossibly far away. Was this his way of buying her silence? Was he going to return the ring, or just pay her off for the emotional distress and keep the beautiful object? Her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Marcus Vance has confirmed your story. I am on my way to the hospital. We need to talk." "JT." Elara's heart hammered in her chest. The truth was out. The confrontation was over. Now, a new, more uncertain chapter was about to begin. She looked at the ring on her own finger, a simple silver band she'd bought for herself years ago, and then at the door, waiting for the man who held her past in the palm of his hand. Julian Thorne arrived at the hospital not with the swagger of a billionaire, but with the quiet solemnity of a man delivering a verdict. He found Elara in the family waiting lounge, a cup of untouched coffee cold in her hands. He carried a small, velvet box. He didn't say a word at first, simply sat down across from her and placed the box on the table between them. "My investigator, Marcus, confirmed everything," Julian said, his voice low. "He found the pawn shop owner, who remembered you. He even found the original pawn ticket. The ring's journey is now a matter of record. It is, without any doubt, yours." A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made her dizzy, washed over Elara. She reached for the box, but Julian placed his hand over it gently. "Before I give it back," he said, his grey eyes searching hers, "I have to understand something. And I need you to be completely honest with me." Elara nodded, her throat tight. "Isabella did not steal this ring from you," he stated. "She bought it legally. She was arrogant and cruel, and for that I am sorry. But she didn't know its history. She told me she bought it because she'd once overheard me telling a business partner about my own mother." He paused, and a shadow of pain crossed his features. "My mother passed away when I was very young. She was an artist, a painter. She loved unique, unconventional jewelry. She had a ring, not identical to this one, but similar in spirit. A moonstone set in platinum, designed to look like star-filled branches. It was the only thing I had left of her. I lost it in a fire at my university dorm 20 years ago." He finally looked at Elara, and she saw not a corporate titan, but a man haunted by his own loss. Isabella knew that story. She admitted she bought the opal ring because she thought it would please me. She thought possessing something that reminded me of my mother would be a shortcut to my affection. It was a calculated, manipulative act, and it was the final proof I needed that our relationship was built on nothing real. Elara stared at him, stunned. The story was now layered with a new, unexpected sadness. 2 lost mothers, 2 lost rings, 2 worlds that had collided over a shared ghost. "I am so sorry, Mr. Thorne," she whispered. "Julian," he corrected her softly. "And I am the one who is sorry, Elara. You lost your mother. And then, because you loved your sister, you were forced to give up the last piece you had of her. Your sacrifice, it's humbling." He slid the box across the table. "This belongs to you." With trembling fingers, Elara opened the lid. There it was. The fire opal seemed to pulse with warmth, the silver leaves gleaming. It was like seeing a beloved face after years of absence. She lifted it from its velvet bed and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. A piece of her was whole again. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "Thank you," she breathed, looking at Julian through her blurry vision. I don't know how I can ever repay you. For this, for what you've done for Lily." "You don't have to," Julian said. "Consider it a debt settled. But there is one more thing, a loose thread." He leaned forward again, his expression now one of pure, unadulterated curiosity. "My investigator is thorough. He dug into the artist who made the ring. It's an unusual design, and he wanted to confirm its origin. The commission was made over 20 years ago. The artist, now an old man in Santa Fe, remembered it clearly. He kept detailed records." Ilara frowned. "What about it?" "The artist confirmed that the ring was commissioned by a man for his wife, Lena," Julian continued, his voice careful. "But he remembered the man's name. He said the man who paid for it, the man who requested the inscription, Amor Manet, was not named Vance." A chill went down Ilara's spine. "What are you talking about? My father was David Vance." Julian's gaze was piercing. He seemed to be weighing his next words with immense gravity. The artist's records, and his memory, are very clear. He said the man who commissioned this ring, the man who loved your mother Lena, was named Daniel Thorne. The name hung in the air between them, an impossible, earth-shattering echo. Daniel Thorne. That was the name of Julian Thorne's father. Ilara felt the floor drop out from under her. The hospital lounge, with its muted colors and antiseptic smell, seemed to warp and bend at the edges. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "That's not possible. My father was David Vance. He raised me. He died in a car accident when I was 16. "Was he your biological father?" Julian asked, his voice gentle but insistent. The question hit her like a physical blow. Of course he was. He had to be. He was the man who taught her to ride a bike, who read her bedtime stories, whose old, worn flannel shirt she still kept in a box under her bed. And yet, a lifetime of small, confusing moments suddenly clicked into place. The fact that she looked nothing like him, with her dark hair and grey eyes, while he was blonde and blue-eyed. The whispered argument she'd sometimes overhear between her parents when they thought she was asleep. The way her mother would sometimes look at her with a profound, almost sorrowful love, as if she were a beautiful, precious secret. I don't know," Ilara admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "We never talked about it. Why would my mother lie about something like that?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound stress. "My father, Daniel Thorne, was a brilliant but complicated man. He built the foundations of this company. He was married to my mother, Elizabeth, for 30 years. But he traveled a lot for work. He spent a great deal of time on the West Coast, overseeing new projects." He looked away, toward the window. "He was also a man with secrets. I always knew it, but I never knew what they were." He pulled out his wallet, but instead of credit cards, he extracted a small, faded photograph from a hidden compartment. It was creased and worn, as if it had been looked at 1,000 times. He slid it across the table. The photo was of a man and a woman, sitting on a park bench, bathed in sunlight. The woman was unmistakably a younger version of Ilara's mother, Lena, her head thrown back in laughter. The man beside her, with his arm around her, was handsome, with dark hair and the same piercing grey eyes as the man sitting opposite Ilara. He was looking at Lena with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration, It was Daniel Thorne. I found this in his private safe after he passed away 5 years ago, Julian said quietly. There was no name on the back. I never knew who she was. I just knew that she was the reason for a sadness in him that he never spoke of. I think my parents' marriage was an arrangement, a partnership. I think this woman, he tapped the photo, was his life's great love. Ilara stared at the image of her mother, so young and happy, with a man who was not her father. The ring, her mother's ring, was on Lena's finger in the photograph, commissioned not by the man Ilara called Dad, but by Julian's father. Amor Mane, love remains. It wasn't a promise between Lena and David Vance. It was a secret message from Daniel Thorne. The implications were staggering. If Daniel Thorne was her biological father, that would mean— Ilara couldn't finish the sentence. That we're related, Julian finished for her, his voice heavy with the weight of the discovery. That you are my half-sister. The word hung between them, more shocking than any accusation, more valuable than any jewel. Sister. Brother. Strangers, connected by a hidden love story and a fire opal ring. Ilara looked from the photograph to Julian's face, truly seeing the resemblance for the first time. The shape of his eyes, the line of his jaw. They were echoes of her own reflection, echoes of the man in the picture. All her life, she had felt a sense of otherness, of not quite belonging. Now she knew why. My mother, Ilara said, her mind racing. She met David after she and your father, after they ended it. David knew. He must have known I wasn't his. But he raised me. He loved me as his own. He was her father in every way that mattered, and her mother, Lena, had carried this secret to her grave to protect them all. Julian nodded slowly. And my father lived out his life with mine. Perhaps they both made a choice, to honor their commitments, even if their hearts were elsewhere. Suddenly, Julian's actions made perfect, heart-wrenching sense. His obsession with the ring, his need to uncover the truth, his inexplicable generosity towards her and Lily. It wasn't charity. It wasn't a billionaire solving a problem. From the moment he saw the raw, undeniable emotion in her eyes at the restaurant, some deep, forgotten part of him must have recognized a piece of his own story, a piece of his father's hidden grief. He wasn't just investigating a waitress's wild claim. He was chasing his own family's ghost. He looked at Ilara, his usual guarded expression replaced by something raw and vulnerable. For 20 years, I felt like I was navigating the world alone. I built an empire, but the foundation was hollow. I had no family left. His gaze drifted towards Lily's room. And then a waitress in a restaurant points at a ring. And suddenly, I do. The stunning reaction in the restaurant wasn't just shock. It was the seismic tremor of recognition, the subconscious jolt of a man seeing a ghost from his father's past, a puzzle piece from his own life, sitting right in front of him. Ilara looked down at the ring on her finger. It was no longer just a memento of her mother. It was a key, a map, a testament to a secret love that had created a connection so powerful it had reached across decades of silence to bring two strangers, a brother and a sister, together. The weeks that followed were a quiet revolution. The truth, once revealed, settled over their lives, changing the landscape forever. There were no grand pronouncements to the world, no shocking headlines in the tabloids. This was a private revelation, a family secret to be pieced together in the quiet rooms of the hospital and the sterile grandeur of Julian's office. Julian threw the full weight of his resources into Lily's care. He flew in specialists from around the globe, and a new, groundbreaking treatment plan was developed. For the first time, the doctors began to speak of Lily's future not in terms of management, but of recovery. He was there not as a benefactor, but as an uncle, sitting by Lily's bedside, reading her stories from his tablet, a gentle awkwardness in him slowly melting away to reveal a surprising warmth. Lily, in her childlike innocence, accepted him immediately. "You have sad eyes like Alara," she told him one day, "but you're building a much bigger castle in my game." For Alara, the world had been rewritten. She looked at Julian and saw not a billionaire, but the brother she never knew she had. She saw her mother's eyes staring back at her. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for so many years began to recede, replaced by a tentative, unfamiliar sense of belonging. One afternoon, Julian took her to a vast, climate-controlled storage facility, a place where he kept the art and artifacts he collected. In one corner, covered by a white sheet, was a collection of canvases. "After my father died, I had his estate cleared," Julian explained. "These were in his private study. I never knew where they came from." He pulled back the sheet. Alara gasped. It was a collection of her mother's paintings, canvases filled with vibrant, emotional landscapes, portraits filled with a longing that Alara now understood. Daniel Thorne hadn't just loved Lena. He had cherished her art, secretly collecting the pieces of her soul she put on canvas. "She was brilliant," Julian said, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "Yes," Alara whispered, tracing the outline of a familiar weeping willow in one of the paintings. She was. Alara quit her job at Aurelia. She didn't have to be a ghost anymore. Julian, discovering her keen eye for art and her deep understanding of her mother's work, offered her a position. Not a token job, but a real one. He was establishing a new charitable wing of his foundation, the Lena Thorne Arts Grant, dedicated to supporting talented, underfunded female artists. He wanted Alara to run it. "Our mothers were both artists," he said, as they stood before the paintings. "Mine never got the chance to share her gift with the world. Yours did, but never got the recognition she deserved. Let's build a legacy for both of them." And so, a new story began. A story not of a waitress and a billionaire, but of a brother and a sister. A story of two families, once separated by secrets and circumstance, now woven together by the thread of a shared past. Alara, now the director of a major arts foundation, often found herself looking down at the ring on her finger. The fire opal, once a symbol of loss and sacrifice, was now a beacon of reunion and hope. It had been a promise from a father to a mother, a memory cherished by a daughter, a mystery that intrigued a son. It was the catalyst that had exposed a lie but revealed a deeper truth. Love remains. Amor mané. The ring had not just brought a mother's memory home. It had brought a family home. It had proven that the strongest connections aren't forged in wealth or status, but in the hidden, unbreakable bonds of the heart, waiting for the right moment to finally, stunningly, come to light. 6 months passed, and the world settled into a new, unbelievable reality. The launch of the Lena Thorne Arts Grant was a major event in the city's philanthropic circles. The grand ballroom of a hotel Julian owned was filled with artists, patrons, and journalists, all buzzing with excitement about this new, powerful force for the arts. At the center of it all stood Alara. She was no longer the invisible waitress from Aurelia. Dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, she spoke at the podium with a quiet confidence that captivated the room. She spoke of her mother, Lena, not as a tragic figure, but as a vibrant, passionate artist whose legacy would now empower a new generation. Beside the stage, Julian watched her, a rare, unguarded expression of pride on his face. In the front row, Lily, her cheeks now full and rosy, sat between her private tutor and a smiling nurse, looking at her older sister with pure adoration. It was a perfect picture of a fractured family made whole. During the reception that followed, a well-meaning journalist from a prominent art magazine approached Elara. "An absolutely inspiring speech, Miss Vance," the woman said. "Your mother's work is incredible. Your father must have been immensely proud of you both." The innocent comment struck Elara with the force of a physical blow. She froze, a champagne flute halfway to her lips. "Your father?" The question was simple, but the answer was a tangled knot in her heart. Which one? The man whose DNA ran through her veins, whose secret love story had inadvertently brought her to this ballroom? Or the man whose name she still carried, who had bandaged her knees, taught her to drive, and loved her unconditionally, knowing she wasn't his? She managed a tight, polite smile. "Thank you." He was. The ambiguity of the answer hung in the air, a ghost at the celebration. That night, long after the applause had faded, Elara couldn't sleep. The sprawling, beautifully furnished apartment Julian had insisted she and Lily move into felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage of someone else's history. She found herself in her walk-in closet, a space larger than her old living room, kneeling on the plush carpet. She pulled out a simple cardboard box, the only piece of her old life that felt entirely real. Inside was the meager inheritance of David Vance. Not money or property, but memories. A worn, faded flannel shirt that still held the faint scent of sawdust and Old Spice. A cracked, leather-bound book of Chopin's Nocturnes, his favorite, with his handwritten notes in the margins. And a small, dog-eared photo album. She opened it to the first page. There was David, a young man with a goofy grin, holding a tiny, bundled Elara in his arms. He looked at her with a look of such profound, fierce love that it made her ache. He wasn't her biological father, but in that moment, in every memory that followed, he was the only father she had ever known. He was the one who worked 2 jobs, a carpenter by day, a piano player in a smoky jazz bar by night, to keep food on their table. He was the one who sat with Lena through her chemotherapy, his quiet strength a pillar for them both. A wave of guilt washed over her. Here she was, her life transformed by the Thorne name and fortune. She was building a legacy for Lena and Daniel Thorne, the secret lovers. But in doing so, was she erasing David Vance? Was she betraying the man who had given her everything, simply because he hadn't given her his blood? The next day, she went to Julian's office, the photo album tucked in her bag. He was in the middle of a frantic video conference with his board in Tokyo, but when he saw her troubled expression through the glass walls of his office, he ended the call abruptly. "What's wrong?" he asked, his focus entirely on her. She slid the photo album across his massive desk, opening it to the picture of David holding her as a baby. "We've spent all this time uncovering the story of Daniel and my mother," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We've built this incredible foundation in their name, and I am so grateful, Julian, but I feel like a fraud." She explained the journalist's question and the crushing weight of her own conflicted heart. "Daniel Thorne is my biological father. He gave me my eyes, and he gave me you. But David Vance was my dad. He gave me my name. He gave me my life. And I feel like in embracing this new world, I'm letting his memory just fade away." Julian listened patiently, his gaze fixed on the photograph. He didn't dismiss her feelings or offer a simple solution. Instead, he walked over to a sleek, minimalist bookshelf and pulled out a framed photo Elara had never noticed before. It was of a young Julian, perhaps 10 years old, standing stiffly beside his father, Daniel Thorne. Both were in suits. There was none of the warmth or easy affection present in Elara's photos. "My father was a brilliant man," Julian said quietly. "But he was a difficult man. He gave me a legacy, an empire to run. He taught me about ambition and strategy. But he never taught me how to throw a baseball. He never read me a bedtime story. The man in your photographs," he gestured to the album, "gave you something my father, for all his wealth and power, never gave me. He gave you a childhood." He looked at Elara, his expression full of a deep, sibling understanding. "You are not betraying him by accepting the truth, Elara. You are honoring him by remembering the love he gave you. A legacy isn't just about blood or money. It's about impact. Daniel Thorne's legacy gave us a foundation. What was David Vance's legacy?" His question clarified everything. David's legacy was music. It was the joy he found in playing the piano, the passion he tried to pass on to her, the way a beautiful melody could soothe any pain. A new idea, clear and powerful, bloomed in her mind. "The Lena Thorne Arts Grant supports visual artists," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It's for the painters, the sculptors, the dreamers like our mothers." She looked Julian straight in the eye. "But music is a different kind of art. It's the art of the heart. David Vance was a musician. He wasn't famous, but he was brilliant. I want to create a new branch of the foundation, a scholarship program for underprivileged children who want to learn music. We can provide them with instruments, lessons, the kind of support David never had." She took a deep breath. "We can call it the Vance Music Scholarship. To honor him, to show that a person's legacy isn't defined by who they loved in secret, but by how they loved out in the open. Both of them were my father's. I think it's time I honored them both." A slow, genuine smile spread across Julian's face. It reached his eyes, chasing away the shadows. "I think," he said, "that is the best idea I've heard all year." In that moment, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Elara's identity wasn't a choice between Vance and Thorne. It was the sum of all their parts. She was the daughter of a secret love and a steadfast love, of art and of music, of a billionaire and a carpenter. And her true legacy, the one she would build herself, would be a bridge between both worlds. What an incredible journey. This wasn't just a story about a lost ring, but about how a single object, infused with love and memory, could unravel decades of secrets and forge a future no one could have ever predicted. It's a powerful reminder that beneath the surface of our ordinary lives, there are often extraordinary stories waiting to be told. The truth has a way of finding its way to the surface, and sometimes the most stunning revelations come from the most unexpected places. A chance encounter, a forgotten inscription, a flicker of recognition in a stranger's eyes. This story shows us that family isn't always the one we are born into, but the one we discover along the way. If this story of loss, sacrifice, and incredible reunion touched your heart, please let us know. Click that like button to show your support and share this video with someone who appreciates a story with a truly powerful twist. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. We have so many more real-life dramas and inspiring tales to share with you. Stories that prove that life is always more intricate and beautiful than it seems. Thank you for listening.